your business is booming, isn't it?
It is.
Why do you think that we have seen such a tremendous increase in stacking silver and gold bullion?
I think it's fear of the future. Fear of the future is everywhere.
What would be some of the top tips that you could give to those who are just starting their silver and gold stacking journey? So, Tim, thank you so much for being here at my house and having some hamburgers with me with Mrs. Yankee. And I know a lot of people have been asking me, Yankee, you have to interview him outside his shop, get him away from all the busyness
And
and
the empty basket.
yeah, the empty basket, and just let him talk. So I definitely have to do less talking on this video and more listening because you have a wealth of knowledge I really want to mine here. Okay. For the people that might not know you that well, let me ask you a few questions about your upbringing, your education, um, any sports or hobbies.
Oh yeah, I tried every sport at one time or another. It's in high school I participated in all kinds of sports. In college I did. Um, I when I was in college I really wanted to race sports cars. So um, when other kids, and this is I graduated in '68. The summer of love, and one of them. Um, when kids were spending their money on dime bags of marijuana, uh, hey, it only costs $20. He said, no, I'm saving my money. And I didn't have any. I didn't know anybody else except for one or two people who were interested in auto racing. Um, but I wasn't about to waste my money on anything else. And so I worked every day I was in college, at either working in the cafeteria. I worked for the Providence Journal Bulletin.
Mhm.
I worked construction in the summer times, and make enough money so I could, live well, and so I could spend my time studying. And, and then when I got out of college, I ended up going in the army like everybody else. I had a low draft number. And at the last day of school, you're supposed to go to the post office to your mailbox, supposed to open it up, make sure there's no mail left in it, then sign the card and turn the card in. So I go to my mailbox, and um, this is like the end of May, and I open it up, and there's a draft notice or some sort of a notice from the local draft board, and I put it back in, locked it, and turned the card in. And I enrolled in the MBA program at the Whittemore School, which is attached to the University of New Hampshire. My father was one of the founding professors of that school,
Mm.
and he spent his life. He worked 30 years in New York City. He worked for the Shell Oil Company. He was a very important guy in that machine. Used to ride the New Haven Railroad into New York City every day from Connecticut. Um, so I guess I learned my um, work ethic from him. He was a very hard worker.
Mm.
He was a perfectionist. I kind of became a perfectionist, but we had different interests. When he was in college, he played professional basketball, and he was good at it. But you didn't have to be 7 feet tall back in those days. He graduated from college in 1929. Um, and he saved every penny he made from playing professional basketball, which wasn't a lot, but it let him invest in stock market. And of course, he graduated in 1929, and all his investments, like everybody else's, went south. He invested in new technologies. He was a very smart investor when it came to new technologies. He had invested in television, movie theaters. Keep in mind the 20s were silent films. So he invested in movie theaters and this new thing called a television, which I don't think they'd even named it yet, and still lost all his money. That's what the 1929 crash was like. The stock of every company went to zero, and that shouldn't mean that the company would disappear from the face of the earth, but they did. And it's why go to work and pay the rent for an office when you got nothing to do and there's your product is dead and everybody's taking a vacation from everything. Um, but he learned then the same thing that Warren Buffett is quite a bit younger than my father. My father passed away years ago, but he used to tell me, and I started investing when I was probably 7 or 8. And he would always say the same thing. Remember, you're not buying a stock, you're buying a company. You're buying ownership in a company. So don't buy anything but the best company you can buy, you can afford, whose stock you can afford. And I did that from the beginning um, until I needed money to do something else, like maybe buy tires for my race car.
You also liked hockey too, didn't you?
Yeah, I played hockey. I had a very good friend who was related to the National Hockey League, and his family were very important to the NHL. And I learned how to skate really late. I used to go with them down to Madison Square Garden and skate on the ice, but um, I would skate on my ankles when everybody else was skating on their blades. So it took me a while to get that straightened out, but because of that association with a good friend of mine, um, I took a liking to hockey and got to be fairly good. Not good enough to play full time in college, but a fair amount. And what I was in a pretty difficult college. I went to Brown University, and it was very clear after a couple of years of being on sports teams that if I didn't stop what I was doing and study, that I was probably going to flunk out. And the courses at that time, colleges had required courses. Yeah, it was a requirement to take an English, math, a science, blah blah blah, and that those are long gone. You pick a major, you take courses in that major. You don't have to take a higher math course. You don't have to take an advanced English course. You don't have to take some sort of science, especially if you haven't decided you want a career in science. Um, but those were requirements in most liberal arts colleges. And I think that took a lot of my time unnecessarily because I got decent grades in courses that I'd already taken in high school. And then the other courses were suffering as a result.
What was your major?
Well, I wanted to major in international relations because we had in that department we had some excellent professors. When it came down to having enough credits, there really weren't enough credits available in international relations, so I ended up graduating in political science. But some of the what I learned in political science and international relations was fascinating. I didn't know how big the world was and how different everybody was in the world. It still amazes me that because I've been to Italy, I've been to Austria, I've been to Switzerland, been to Germany and France, been blah blah blah, and it still amazes me to this day that you cross a line that's not far from the last line you crossed, and you're in a different world with a different language
A different
entirely,
culture. Yeah.
different culture,
Yeah.
and they over the more recently had a lot of immigration problems in Europe. Um, you wonder how an immigrant going to Europe can possibly figure out where to go unless you've had some training in languages. But um, German is so different from French. and
Your family situation. So you got married. You
Yep,
had four children,
yes,
a son and three daughters.
in 5 years.
In 5 years, you're a busy man, and you built a successful career too at IBM.
Yes,
And then you faced tragedy. You lost your wife
yeah,
suddenly.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about her.
Um, well, she was when I met her, she was like the happiest person I ever met, and she rarely got discouraged. If somebody insulted her or one of her friends did something that was unkind, she never told anybody about it. She just
Hmm.
said pass it off, and she said well that's whatever, just pick a name. Well, that's Janie. That's the way she is. And Yeah, she was very tolerant and had lots and lots of friends. But she had a heart that back in those days, well, when I was growing up, I remember a top athlete. I guess he was a famous baseball player from my town who died from what they called enlarged athlete's heart. And I didn't know what that meant. And it wasn't until my wife died of the same thing that I found out what it meant.
Mm.
There's a tricuspid valve. I think it's the aortic valve. It's a three-part valve. And if it's not unusual for one part of the valve to not develop properly. So in the process, as your heart is beating, if you're at rest, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But if you're running or playing a sport or something, you're regurgitating blood constantly. So your heart has to work harder constantly. And it's not like my irregular heartbeat, which affected one part of the heart. Um, it affects your whole heart muscle. The heart muscle has to work that much harder. And my wife was a great athlete. And of course, we started having kids. To her, it was a team. Okay, so okay, let's try every sport. Let's see, what are we doing today? We're doing volleyball or baseball, or are we going to go skating or whatever? And she was that kind of a mother, and she loved staying home. She had a great job with IBM. That's where I met her, and one of the best systems engineers that I'd met. Um, but she was also, a professional mother. She loved being a mother, and it wasn't unusual. And I'd go home in the afternoon, and there'd be 3 or 4 kids I'd never seen before at our house because nearby families or friends would drop their kids off and go shopping or something because they didn't want to take their kids to the food market
Wow.
because it was a good, safe place to drop the kids off. And more often than not, they'd be a softball game or something going on in the backyard.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it was kind of a shock when she passed away, and
Yeah.
um, I knew immediately I would have to change my lifestyle because my only job was taking care of my kids. That was my primary job, and what I had to figure out is how do I do that and still make a living to support my kids. And right after, I had a few discussions with Jesus. He was very helpful
I
in
bet.
pointing me in and I knew what the direction was.
Mm.
I just wasn't sure how to get there.
Mm.
And I have to admit that Jesus was very helpful in pointing me in the right direction. Um, and I had a dream, and my image of Jesus appeared in the dream. And he said something like, "You asked for my advice." And basically, I said, "Jesus, what am I going to do with these 4 kids without their mother?" And he said, "What you should be asking is, what are these 4 kids going to do without their mother?" And that was my fear. How do I leave a job that is a tremendous way of making a living so I'm able to provide well for my kids, um, and then still have time to raise my kids the way I want to? And that was the problem. And by pointing me in that direction, which is what I knew all along, is that was my main job, taking care of my kids. Um, I had to then figure out a way of doing that, and it's like a godsend. Um, Within a year, IBM had a downsizing, and I mean, I took the first offer because this is exactly what I was looking for, and it was a great offer. I got a bridge to retirement. I had 24 years with IBM,
Mm.
and so I got a bridge to full retirement. Got to keep the medical, dental benefits and everything else, which came in handy because it meant my kids could compete for Watson scholarships through IBM, and 2 of my kids did win that scholarship. Um, but it allowed me to take a little bit of cash and go find another business. And this business came up for sale. The owner was in terminal cancer, um, and he'd sold a lot of the business off to provide for his own family.
This was the coin and stamp
It
shop
was a
in
coin and stamp
Manchester.
shop, yeah, by the same name. And so I negotiated a price with him, and I had a partner at that time, and we both put a lot of money in. And if I often said if I had to start the same business today, I probably wouldn't do it because starting a business like that is really tough. The owner had sold off a lot of the good inventory, which was necessary. I mean, he knew he wasn't going to live forever, and which and it made that's an inventory that you have to build over a period of years. And of course, that's been rebuilt. But um, my partner kind of said, we kind of sat down, and my partner said, we can't both make a living off of this business. And I said, yeah, I've noticed that. I at that time in 1991, I was still working for IBM. The end of 91, around 92 is when they started the buyouts. It was a huge downsizing. Um, and so it was around the beginning of 92 that I really um, broke away from IBM, and they let me be a business partner. And I almost immediately bought the store. So I had a business. Now all I had to do was make sure I could support myself and a family with it. The best part about it, and I don't even remember a lot of the early parts of the business, it was coins and stamps and jewelry and gold and silver. Um, but it was in the early 90s. There wasn't much interest in gold and silver, except for people who were bringing in jewelry to scrap. Um, but it was, the rare coin business and rare stamp business was at least thriving. And so I bought my partner out and at the beginning of 1992. And I just, I knew what all the expenses were. So I was doing daily accounting and, determining what I had to do to bring enough money in to pay the bills. So I used to go to coin shows and, um, there was a baseball card craze going on. So I took on baseball cards and, um,
Wow, you're into a lot of things at that
oh, you
store.
have to. I mean, that's the only
Wow.
way a coin shop could thrive back in the early 90s. I sold metal detectors and I had a metal detector anyway, so I knew all about them. And that boomed. So between 1992 and 1995, it was touch and go. But in 95, we actually sold 550 metal detectors. Okay.
Wow.
But knowing something about them and knowing how to explain them to people, and we advertised on television. And the station was in Derry, New Hampshire, and they had a treasure hunting show, and I was the main advertiser on the treasure hunting show. Um, it was costly, but it brought in a ton of business. And the people who ran the station, they had their own people make up the ad copy, and I supplied all the pictures and everything, and so that boomed. Um, Gold and silver grew gradually, starting with the Gulf War that was in um, 91.
Yep.
And, so gold took a jump, not a big jump, but, it went from, 3 to, you know, 7 or 8. No, it wasn't that bad. It didn't much get above. Well, it was I remember one big customer at 253.50 gold. And he said, "This is the time to strike." He was telling this one guy he invested a ton of money at that price, so he was getting gold coins for less than $300 an ounce. And I met people like that were deep thinkers, um, but they had one thing in common: they were providing for their families. The best part of all of it was I never missed any of my kids' activities. It didn't matter if we were pond skating or softball game or soccer game or baseball. My son was a pitcher.
Hmm.
Um, Even coaching sports, coaching soccer and stuff. I never missed a parent teacher conference. If they ever needed any homework, assistance with their homework, I was there. Um, but I was doing exactly what I wanted to do in life. And, you
Sounds
know,
like you made the right choice.
well,
You've done a great
so
job.
far today, I've talked to all of my kids except one. And if I
She may
wasn't,
call during this interview, right?
well, if I wasn't coming over here, I would have called her on the way home. Great
From
feeling.
one dad to another. Good job.
Thank you.
Uh, when did you see silver stacking, gold stacking really start to take off with your customers?
Hmm. Well, I was stacking back in the early 80s. All through that time, I was buying bags of silver coins. Had favorite coins. Obviously, all the 1916 coins where it had special meaning. And I don't think there's much discussion about that. They did bring out a 2016 gold series based on the Mercury dime, the Standing Liberty quarter, and the Walking Liberty half. Um, but that was an era in American history that's very, very important. And people still think the dime is a Mercury dime. It's not. It was a wing of liberty. It was supposed to signify freedom of thought. Um, there were things going on in the teens that were infringing on freedom of speech, freedom of thought. Communism took over in Russia. There was the First World War, but freedom of thought was being infringed upon all over. Karl Marx had started writing um, in what 1840s. He wrote the Communist Manifesto. There were groups of intellectuals that thought that that was the best way to go. But even the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital were not economic systems. They were political systems. And people still to this day don't realize socialism is not an economic system. But anyway, I enjoyed coins, coins that had meaning. And so that was what I was stacking. I remember as a boy when we went to a beach club in the summertime, and my mother, because I was a coin collector, gave me a Walking Liberty $half every day. Okay, and I would buy a hamburger and a Coke and an ice cream, and I just had to make sure I had 10 cents left over to call home in case there was a thunderstorm. Okay,
That's great.
for 50 cents.
Wow.
And but that's the way my life was growing up. I was always a coin collector, and for what little money I had, I guess you could call me a stacker
Yep.
at the age of 5 to 6 or 7.
Your business though has gone through a lot of
A
changes,
lot.
right?
It's the biggest change is stamp collecting, and you know, there are two things about stamp collecting. Stamps are all history. It doesn't matter if they're U.S. stamps or foreign stamps. All about history. The stamps are made to tell the story of a country's history. Also, tell a story about the people who are famous to that country, and I mean, that's certainly true in our case. Um, but it's all over the world. That's why stamps came into effect. The first stamp was the first person who devised the postal system. That was uh, Franklin, Benjamin Franklin. He was the founder of the postal system. And the second one was Washington. So the 5 cent stamp was Franklin. Since Washington was twice as important, he got the 10 cent stamp. But then it mushroomed from there. I mean, Thomas Jefferson was an early appearance on the stamp. There were lots of Washington stamps, lots of Franklin stamps all throughout stamp history. Stamps began in this country in 1847, and those first two stamps are still valuable. There's still collectors for them. Um, but what became really valuable after that were not the definitive stamps. The stamps that were made just to mail letters. They were the commemorative stamps, and those early commemorative stamps because they weren't just 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent stamps. They were some 5 cent stamps and some 10 cent stamps. They were only made for collectors. But that's where stamp collecting became important first in this country during the Civil War because we had a postal system across the country, and the country wasn't that big back then. It was 30 something states maybe at the end of the war. Um, but soldiers needed to communicate with the home, with folks back home. A lot of the communication was something that people didn't want to hear. What, 625,000 people died in that war. But there are people all over the country, as big as it was, who waited all day for some word from the battlefields. But that's what really started um, communications like that, postal communications in this country. And the stamps from that era are important because if you get one on a letter during the Civil War, don't take it off the letter and make sure you got the letter because that's important history. Stamps have always been tied to history, and as schools teach less and less about history, which has been the case probably starting in the 60s, maybe 60s, 70s, 80s. Um, History just became less important to people.
Mm.
It's shocking to see
Mm.
people, well, we're going to tear down those Confederate statues because they're all racist. No, wait a second. Robert E. Lee was top of his class at West Point. He was a brilliant soldier. He was a very intelligent individual. Above all, he was an American.
Mm.
He was an American, a very patriotic American. Okay, when the South decided to secede, he had to make a decision. He grew up in Virginia. He had this great mansion in Arlington, and they said we need a leader because we're going to be two countries. Everybody is in agreement. Everybody in the North knows there's going to be two countries. Everybody in the South knows there's going to be two countries. We'd like you to help us make the break. And as a patriot, as an American patriot, and a patriot to his own state, keep in mind the states were all independent this country was formed. They were not run by a dictator anywhere, and no state had a constitution that could allow the state to be run by a dictator. You have a governor. A governor is just like a governor on an old Briggs and Stratton engine. Okay, it keeps the engine running, without going too fast or too slow. Okay, and but it's the Civil War. There had to be decisions made because to become part of the United States, you had to have a two-thirds majority of your state legislature to want to join the United States. There was no provision in the Constitution for leaving the United States. Nobody ever assumed that once you became part of this great country, you'd ever want to leave. So there was no secession. And Lincoln was determined to keep everyone together. Why? Because the South had a lot of good things. It was the breadbasket of the country. The North had become industrialized. His attitude was, "We're good together, but a house divided unto itself cannot stand."
Yes.
So that it's again history is what's most important to the survival of a country.
Mm.
And I don't see anybody protecting history. I don't see them even teaching history in schools anymore, especially American history.
Good point. And this all came from our discussion on stamps. I just love it. No, it's great.
That's the one thing about stamps is they are a portrayal
Of
of a
history.
country's history.
Yeah.
Our mint began in 1793, and first they had to decide because the country had no money. We just formed the country. The Constitution was passed in 1787, and they had a framework, but no way of paying the bills. What if we get involved in another war? How are we going to pay for it? They went decided. The federal government decided to go to each one of the 13 states, and ask them if they could um, quantify their contribution to the revolution, and the government would raise the money and pay that, so that no state started off with the debt. And well, Virginia, we put in much more, in New York, but so much more than New Hampshire and Vermont. But that's what we're trying to prevent. We want everybody to start off on an even footing, and that's had implications throughout history. It took, I don't know, 30 or 40 years to pay that debt, but every state started out with only the debt that they ran up on their own. So this country basically started out without any debt.
Mm.
Contrast that to the United States of Europe. Okay, every country that joined the European Union was already drowning in debt, and they had no provision in their constitution to pay down that debt. So there's no way, only the ECB, the central bank, can issue bonds. Well, what if a country like Spain is about to collapse under the debt? Okay, we'll issue bonds for Spain. So he did. I don't think anybody bought them. But that you can't start a country like the United States of Europe and have every country drowning in debt. So now you have a a great big basket case full of little basket cases. And that's why they don't want Turkey, they don't want Ukraine, because those economies are all basket cases too. So they get enough basket cases. And it was ill conceived,
Yeah.
but it was probably the only alternative to they're all failing on their own. Stamps around the world when I was growing up were very healthy, very very healthy hobby. They got kind of overproduced in the 60s and 70s. The bicentennial almost bailed it out as a hobby, but what it is that they killed it was the price of the individual stamps. Back in the late 80s was the beginning of the baseball card craze, and
Hmm.
you make a parallel. You could go to the post office and get one sheet of Civil War stamps for $6.40, or you could go to CVS and buy 3 packs of baseball cards for $1. Okay, 3 packs for $1. There'd be 30 baseball cards. Okay, so you could buy one sheet of 20 stamps for $6.40, or go to CVS and get 30 baseball cards for $1. And if they didn't have $6.40, it's hobbies like that killed it. But there
Yeah.
were other things. I mean, they were Beanie Babies, and
Right. Coin collecting. Do you think that's also a hobby that is
well, it's
dying?
declined some. But the thing about coins is different from stamps. Is all the coins have some intrinsic value, at least in your own country they do. Um, there's still kids who collect Indian head cents and Buffalo nickels and um, Mercury dimes, things like that, because they're still more or less affordable. The silver coins are getting less affordable for kids,
Mm.
but if a father is collecting with a son, and I collected with my father, everything he had in his collection he got out of change, including his 20-cent piece collection, which is just um, I wish I still had that collection.
I know.
But
Talk about that. Yeah.
and people don't know we had 20-cent pieces. People know we had 3-cent pieces. We had a
Right.
3-cent silver piece, which is really tiny. We had a 3-cent nickel. The
Right.
first nickel was a 3 cent. So if you said, "So what do you got for change?" "Oh, I got a dime and a nickel." It was a 3-cent piece. Um, but they went through a lot of nickels. I mean, the first large size, current size nickel was a shield nickel, and it started in 1865 or something like that. And then the Liberty nickel, the B nickel,
Mm.
and then after that it was the Buffalo nickel, and they were all in circulation when I was growing up. Well,
Over
when
the
I was
years.
10 to 12, I had a paper route,
Mm.
and it was 35 customers right around where I lived, and I had two bankers in the route, and they had to pay $1.05 per week for the paper. I got 2 cents a paper. They had to pay $1.05 for 6 days of the newspaper. Okay, um, so they would give me a silver dollar and an interesting nickel. It could have been a Shield nickel or a Liberty nickel every week. And so I take these home to my father and I said, "I've got to give this to the paper company. What do we do?" And my father said, "Well, let's work out a work schedule." I did more work so I could keep those silver dollars.
Nice.
So he would buy them from the paper company, and then by giving me money so I could reimburse the paper company, we had to put it in an envelope and post it at the local candy store, and that's how I started my collection.
Mm.
And I had lots and lots of silver dollars and all this stuff, but that was everybody collected coins because there were interesting things in the coins all the time.
And it was also about history too.
Was also about history. I mean, the 1916 series is worth looking at because all these different portrayals of liberty are important to this country, important to the history.
Your primary business has shifted to more of the silver and gold bullion for your customers. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
that's correct.
And your business is booming, isn't it?
It is.
Why do you think that we have seen such a tremendous increase in stacking silver and gold bullion?
I think it's fear of the future. Fear of the future is everywhere, and I have to admit that this government is not helping things
Hmm.
when they make everybody unsure about the future. There's 74 million people who did vote for Donald Trump. Honestly, I have no idea how many people voted for Biden, and I don't care. But to go to war with 74 million people in your own country is doing nothing but creating fear of the government and what the future has to hold. It's fear.
It's fear.
It
Thank
is
you.
fear.
Yeah. What would be some of the top tips that you could give to those who are just starting their silver and gold stacking journey?
More often than not, and I get probably 20 or 25 calls a day from people who are asking questions just like this. But more often than not, I find that people are already on the right track. Usually it's how much do I put into gold? How much do I put in silver? Probably the same answer is if you have a chunk of money you want to put in a safe place, that's where you put it in gold. It's something that you don't think you'll ever have to spend. You want to have it in case you have an emergency. Um, and, if you don't need it down the road, you can at least leave it for your children. Um, but, the place to put something in a safe place, money in a safe place is gold. And silver is more a barter currency. It is more every day becoming a barter currency. Um, I know there are farm stands up north that where the owner will take. I don't know if they'll take it all in silver, but
Hmm.
they'll take silver for
Hmm.
you know ears of corn or vegetables or whatever they're selling. Um, and certainly a lot of people will take gun dealers will sell you ammo for silver. Um, Most of the ones I've talked to will. And if you want to buy somebody's gun, we have a lot of people who would sell you a gun for silver, or gold. But I think that you need to look at some sort of currency that you can make liquid if you need to, and
What
that's where silver is. Silver is very liquid.
What about those who are trying to figure out if they should save for a larger size denomination of gold bullion, or should they get the smaller fractional first? Would you say there's a certain uh, price point or an area where it's like, okay, it's time to get into gold, but save it for a larger denomination rather than a tenth of an ounce? Or what's your opinion on
I
that?
think saving for a larger denomination makes sense. I bought a dozen quarter ounce eagles last night. I bought 8 more 1 ounce gold buffaloes last night. I bought another 10th ounce gold coins last night. And I still think the premiums on the fractionals are too high. Um, I know why they're high. The U.S. Mint is doing the best it can to meet demand. Obviously, the item that costs the least amount of money is going to be the one that they're going to have to see the greatest demand in. So they make lots of 10th ounce. They make lots of quarter ounce. I'm not sure they can ever keep up with demand for the fractionals. The fractionals can be purchased in other ways. The bars are a good way because they don't have that mystique or aura of the United States Mint. They may come from a Swiss mint. May come from a Germany or France or whatever, or the Perth Mint in Australia or Canadian Mint. But you can buy fractionals a lot less if you want a smaller piece of gold to barter with. Um, don't overlook the bars because of the same thing. But the premiums are high on all those small coins. Um,
Do you advise new stackers to be careful with how aggressive they are, maybe with it, in terms of maybe some of them are in debt?
yeah, I think one of our more famous videos. When you asked me, well, now that looks like Biden's going to be president, what do you suggest people do? And I said, sell everything you don't need.
That was a popular video.
Yeah, but I don't think they understood the preface. Um, if you don't know what's going to happen in the government and you're a little concerned about what the socialists in the government have in store for you, start with easy stuff. Get rid of stuff you don't need. Um, and I said, if you have anything left over after you've paid your debt down,
Mm-hmm.
that's the important thing. Get rid of the debt, and if there whatever's left over, put half in the cash and half in the precious metals because the precious metals are a good, safe place to put money. Um, yeah, and people will say, "Well, yeah, but it went all the way up to $2,000 an ounce, and now it's only 17." Um, yeah, it does that.
It does
If you
that.
put it
Yep.
away, it doesn't really matter what it is.
Right.
If you're not planning to spend it,
Good point.
and it's but they're both liquid. That's what's important. And I think people ask me, should I get the sovereign coins or should I get bars and rounds? Um, for barter, it really doesn't matter.
Hmm.
If for liquidity, it may matter. Okay, whether you get
Hmm.
a sovereign coin or a bar.
Or maybe in a worst case scenario, a little bit of trust.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's certainly
Worst case.
that's what I mean by liquidity.
Liquidity. Right. Right.
Not many people are going to argue about a silver American Eagle, where they may say, "Well, I don't know anything about these Krugerrands. How do you know they're real?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
All right, Tim, we're going to continue the discussion on gold and silver in a bit. We're going to talk about the bullion markets. We're going to talk about manipulation, confiscation. And I am going to ask you where you think the price of gold and silver are going, both in the short term and the long terms.
the short term, you mean my lifetime.